So welcome everyone. We were talking about how to build a content delivery network. This is specifically in regards if you get asked for this in a interview. And so we're going to do that now. We're going to talk over what goes into a content delivery network, what a content delivery network is, and how to ace this question if you get it in an interview, as well as if you're just curious of understanding them a little bit better. That's what we're going to do today. So as we learned in any Design X question, you should ask as many questions as you can. Questions have twofold things. Not only do you get further understanding and show that you understand when designing something, one of the things you have to do is get the requirements, but they can also show that you understand the problem domain. So what is the problem domain for a content delivery network is to deliver content quickly. And I'm going to put another word in here that is mostly true: static content quickly. So content that doesn't change often. You know, we could say does not change often. So to deliver content that does not change often quickly, we want to deliver that content as quickly as possible. So one of the first questions is it geo, does it need to be a geo distributed a CDN? Most people are going to say yes. There's very few content delivery networks that aren't. If the answer here is no, then mostly what you're doing is you're just putting a cache before any of your calls, which is fine and an acceptable thing to do. You can even cache REST requests that don't change very often. All right. Another thing is, since we understand that a CDN is effectively a cache, we need to know our retention policies. There's a source of truth for everything this is caching. How often do we want that? Do we want the ability to invalidate things? So this is really powerful because what this allows you to do is not update some of the things in the cache unless if they're invalidated. For example, if you upload a new resource. Let's talk about geo-distributed. Why do you want geo-distributed? Well, as a cache, you don't know where your information is coming. Can I draw on this map? I can draw on this map. Perfect. We need a darker color. Okay, our stroke our stroke needs to be blue. There we go. All right. We don't know where our user is going to be. So our user could be here in England. And if our cache was sitting here, over here, if our CDN was sitting here, then you're talking about at least a 200 millisecond round trip to get the thing. Even if the cache is as fast as it can, you're talking probably 200 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds both ways. And this isn't really that great. Even if your servers sat back here and served, the REST responses, which would take time, you can still generally display static content much faster. And it makes your websites feel very quick and fast to respond because most of it loads before the backing data loads. And even if your servers have computation and things to do, this can be a nice way, even if your servers are very close. But even then, a lot of times servers will you'll have a server sitting in Frankfurt. So even if you had servers in Europe, most likely your servers are sitting here in Frankfurt. That's the AWS data center. So you're Frankfurt here. We're just going to say Frankfurt. That's a big data center. And Frankfurt's close to there. All right. So even then, what you can do is you want this content delivery network to be geo-distributed, which means you could have a CDN here. And that means instead of this lengthy round trip, I grabbed the picture instead of the things. Instead of this lengthy round trip, this person would be able to get their CDN stuff in under 10 milliseconds. Really, really fast. And then the calls to here, hopefully you're at like 50 milliseconds. So this speeds up your website loading amazingly fast. That's the idea of a geo-distributed. So you have CDNs everywhere. In the United States, you probably have 2 for the East and West Coast. In Africa, you probably have 3 if you're really trying to, or more. You could have many more because you want them as close as possible. So if you're using a real CDN provider, they're going to have a bunch of places where this CDN is, so that even if you only have a server to cover all of this area, one server, the static content gets there really quickly. Now, how do you know which CDN to hit? So let's say your user is sitting here. How does it know that this is the content delivery? We all are familiar with the idea of DNS. And DNS, if I was going to do it really simply, and, if you guys want more on DNS, we can talk about it. DNS gives us a way to take a friendly name. So we'll take a friendly name. And it gives us the ability to map this to an IP address. Just really, really simply. Map it to an IP address. Not so friendly. It's more powerful than this, though, because if you think about it, this IP address can change, and the friendly name doesn't have to. So the null cloud can change where its IP address is for its website, and it can change the IP, and the friendly name can stay the exact same. So it allows you to have a little bit of control and ability to change things in the back end without affecting the users. So when you go to google.com, you hit different servers depending on where you are in the United States. And if they want to shut down an IP address or a section, they can. Or if they want to add a new one, they can. So this is effectively your DNS. But DNS can actually solve another problem. If you look at Route 53 or Cloudflare, I know those two are geo-enabled DNS providers. You can actually make different maps for the different regions. So this is not going to be how to make your own DNS. We could talk about how DNS works more. But for this, and I think this is completely fine for an interview question, you're using a geo-aware DNS. So this is for map US East. This is map US West. This is Europe East and Europe West. And, we could have one for South Africa, North Africa. We don't have to go through all of these. So this is what a geo-aware DNS does. And how they do it is basically there's lists of IP addresses and where they come from. So if you go with my IP address, I'm not going to show you my IP address, but if you let's get an IP address. We can actually just do this right now. Let's get out of this. Let's dig google.com and get a IP address for Google. All right. So we have an IP address. We can actually go and find where this IP is located. And there's actually lists of these that you can buy. I believe there's actually free ones where you can go and IP address geo. All right, so here we go. We have the latitude, longitude, the region. I'm hitting California. This is the stuff that you can get from this. And so you can pay for a service that gives these. These are just lists. These are well-known things. And that's all these geo-aware DNSs are doing. They're either hosting their own or they're paying for a high-quality list. And so when you do this dig, you actually forward your IP address. It's part of the request when you do a DNS lookup. So DNS is up here. And when you do the lookup, your IP address, your exit gateway to the internet's IP is in this. And now with DNS, this could actually not be the root resolver, and so it might actually have to ask your DNS server, and that's fine. Because what happens generally is if this DNS server asks this, generally the reason you ask this DNS server is because you hit a different CDN. So basically, how DNS servers work is they don't all hold all the records. You have a root server that you paid for your DNS one to be in, and this will just act as a cache for it. Now, what happens is you can actually screw with this, because what happens is if you say you don't let your web browser pick the DNS server for you, and you say that you want to use a DNS server in Alaska, well, then everything is going to think that you're in Alaska or some other way in the world. But that's how GeoDNS works. And if they say that you want geo-distributed CDN, you need to leverage a geo-aware away. You need to hit a geo-aware DNS, and that's how it's going to work. That's how the DNS system is going to work. So basically, because I'm on the East Coast here. When I go and make a DNS query, that DNS is going to say, the IP address is this one here. When somebody in Europe makes a DNS query, when they make a DNS query over here, this is going to say, the IP address for this is here, or actually, it's here. That's where the CDN is, and that's how a geo-aware DNS system works, and it's based off your IP address. It's really not super fancy. All right, so, but this is just the start of your CDN. Now we have to have ways. We have to talk about retention policy and the ability to invalidate. You have to have new content. We said it doesn't change often. We didn't say it doesn't change ever. So one of the ways that you can do this is you could set time to live. So every cache has a time to live, TTL, and you could just say that every hour it's invalidated. And what we mean by that is that every hour, this cache here, this content delivery network says, I don't have it. And it has to go to the source, whatever the source is. Let's say, because I'm on the East Coast, that it's over here. I have to go back here and get this. And that will be a long request. That will be, the 200 millisecond round trip. 200 milliseconds round trip. You could take this approach. You could take the invalidate on push. So we could say that this never invalidates unless if we actually distribute it. So this is kind of the Twitter fan out method, where when you make a change to some of that content, you fan it out. These are the questions you need to ask when trying to solve this, is what type of cache that they want to have. How do they want to update the cache? Do they want the easy way is just a retention policy, a time to live, and the hard way is the invalidate. Invalidation is hard. Invalidation of a cache is difficult, and a little bit more difficult to make sure that it happens correctly. But the nice thing about the ability to invalidate is you don't get these long wait times, because when the cache gets updated here, it pushes it out to all of your other caches immediately. All right, well, if there's no other questions, we'll get on to the last half of this. Really, designing a CDN is maybe one of the easiest questions you can get asked. And a lot of it depends on how they answer the questions when they're asking. Does it need to be located and geo aware? Also, like the ability to invalidate. We can talk about this, but this would be its own topic. We're not going to cover how to invalidate caches and methods for doing this. If you guys want that, ask in Discord, ask in chat. We can do it. Leave a comment on the YouTube video after it's posted and let me know that that's what you want. And we'll talk about how to invalidate a cache. We have a lot of stuff we can talk about. We'll tackle them one at a time. All right. So the other questions that you can start to dig into and might affect is, what are you caching? A lot of the times, your CDNs are very generic. They're meant to hold static assets and files, and they're designed to be that way. But you could have a unique requirement. Now, most of the time, if they're asking this, there's two reasons they're asking you to build a content delivery network. There's two reasons. The first reason is because this is what the company does. This is what they do. This is kind of what they do. And I would expect you to know this going into the interview. The other reason is just to test your ability to say how the web works. If you noticed as we got into this, we talked a lot about how the web works in general. We talked a lot about how we make the internet fast for people. And you're going to see a lot of questions around that. It's not about designing a cache, because this is fairly easy. Sure, they want to know that you understand a CDN as a cache. Sure, they want to know that you have the ability, you understand retention policies or how to invalidate data. Maybe they don't even care if you know how to invalidate data in a cache, but that is a method you could use to update your data. What they want to see, though, is that you understand how DNS and all of those things tie together to build something like this. They just want to see that comprehension of how does the internet work. This is the main thing that you're going to be talking about. They're going to be asking, how do IP addresses, do you know what DNS does at a very high level, at least, and how it works to do a CDN? These are the types of things that you can expect. You don't need to know necessarily that the DNS looks up a list, even though it does look up a list on the online, to see where that source comes from, to see where that IP address is coming from. So be ready to talk about caches. So any question you'd be prepared to talk about a cache for, you should be prepared to talk. You should be prepared to talk about in a content delivery network. So be prepared to talk all things caches. This includes how to design a good cache. This is, again, what are you caching? Why are you caching it? Does time matter? You're going to have to ask questions about that. So if we do an interview on this where somebody interviews me, those are the things that I'm going to be asking. What are you caching? Is it files? Is it static files? Is it images? What are we caching? Another thing is, does it need to be able to invalidate the cache, or can we just work with a time to live? So be prepared to talk all things cache. Be prepared to talk about how the internet works at a fundamental level. How does DNS work? Why is that important? And that's it. This is it. How to build a CDN. It's actually a fairly easy question if you understand it. I think that's the beauty of these questions, is if you do understand them, they're not trick questions. They're not trying to trick you. This is why I love system design things, because then also the interviewer guides you with answers to your questions. So if they want to see more on your ability to invalidate a cache, they're going to ask you questions about it. They're going to say, okay, Cool. So I see that you put a time to live on this, but what if we wanted the ability to invalidate it? So, that we don't have to wait the hour of getting the wrong website to now have the right website that we've just deployed. How would we do that? And now the interviewer has just guided you to exploring the limits of your knowledge. So it's pretty cool.